This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work, who are having an influence over how things work. You've heard me joke before that Ohio has about 5,000 people in that category, so it's going to take me a long time to get through all that. But it's my great pleasure today to be sitting down with Bill Phillis, who has been involved in education and education reform, equity, and adequacy for, shall we just simply say, a fair amount of years. So first of all, Bill, thank you very much for coming on. So tell us a little bit, first of all, how did you fetch up to doing all this? What's your background? You're from southeastern Ohio, if I remember correctly.
No, I'm actually from northeastern Ohio.
But you did a while your superintendency. But I'm jumping ahead. Go ahead.
When I was 20 years old, I became a teacher in southeastern Ohio in Ross County.
Okay.
And then a principal. Following that, I superintended in Portsmouth area, and then jumped back to my hometown in Columbiana County to be superintendent of Columbiana County Schools, and also was the superintendent of the Joint Vocational School District. In fact, I initiated the Joint Vocational School District in Columbiana County as a county superintendent. Then
my good friend Sean Logan is from
Sean was just a mere kid when I was in that area. Then Martin Essex, the state superintendent of public instruction, called me one day and asked me if I would be interested in becoming assistant superintendent of public instruction for the state. And I said, well, I had never thought about that, but I will think about it. And about 5 days later, I decided to become the state's assistant superintendent of public instruction. Then in 1991, after having served 16 years in the State Department of Education as assistant superintendent and being the liaison between the Department of Education and the General Assembly, I decided that I really wasn't making any impact on what was going on in the state of Ohio in the education field. So I joined the group that was suing the state, the Coalition for Equity and Adequacy of School Funding. I didn't initiate the group. I joined the group in 1992 that I joined the group. I resigned from the state and made a conscious decision to work with the group that was suing the state with regard to the school funding issue.
So tell us a little bit about the coalition now. What is it up to? What's it doing? What has it done? For those out there who may not know, it'd be surprising. I say to people, Derolph, and they look at me and go, the what?
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, before I started working with the coalition, they had already filed suit in the Common Pleas Court in Perry County, and the contention was that the school funding system, in fact, the education system, violated the thorough and efficient clause of the Constitution. The Constitution provides that the General Assembly shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. So that was the contention. There was not a thorough and efficient system. That case went through the Supreme Court. In 1997, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs.
Written by Francis Sweeney.
And that case was decided 3 additional times by the Ohio Supreme Court, after it was vetted and after it was returned to the trial court judge and went through the process. And so that case essentially ended in the summer of 2003.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit then about that, what's called informally the Derolph decision, written by Francis Sweeney. One of the things that Francis Sweeney said in there, and I will encourage everybody out there, read the decision. It's a remarkably well-written, very lucid, and frankly, good literature. He did a remarkably good job when he wrote it. He said that the idea of a local school system in Ohio is a myth. Okay, that's flat out what he said. The question is, we don't hear a whole lot out of the coalition for that aspect of it. Do you guys have any stand on governance reform of local school districts? Do you encourage them to combine the back office services of superintendent and treasurer and that type of stuff?
Well, my interpretation of what Francis Sweeney was saying was that the local boards of education have limited decision-making powers because they don't have sufficient resources in many cases to actually make decisions. In fact, at that time and still to this day, many boards of education are presiding over reduced revenues, are presiding over reductions in force as opposed to building a better education system.
What Sweeney actually said was, it is a state system. The idea of it being a local system is a myth. He said it is a state. He said it is a state system. So the question is, and see, we're getting into this. There's always been this tension between what is local and what is state, and that's why I'd like to explore a little bit here.
It is true that the Constitution identifies our system of education as a state system.
Right.
The state is responsible for a thorough and efficient system.
Right.
But that doesn't in any way diminish the responsibility of local boards of education to provide for that system. The state does not deliver educational opportunities.
Right.
The state merely sets the standards, sets the pace,
Okay.
is the cheerleader for quality education. It's the local districts that deliver the product, the education product,
Okay.
and educate the young people.
So how will we know when we've hit thorough and efficient? What is the standard by which we can use to know that basically you've won? How do we know when Bill Phillis and the Coalition for Equity and Accuracy has won? What is that number? How do we know that?
Well, I can't tell you the number in terms of dollars per pupil, but what I can tell you is that this state needs to define and to put forward the components of a high-quality education. That's the standard, a high-quality education.
So let's bifurcate this, and this may be a false bifurcation, and if it is, I'd like for you to tell me. I've always seen the education issue into these two issues. You have one, a governance issue, and two, you have a financial issue. And on the governance side, you get into things like proficiency tests, evaluations of teachers, evaluations of schools, principals, superintendents, and all that. On the funding side, you're talking about the raw money aspect of it. So is that a good bifurcation or is that a false bifurcation?
Well, let me talk about that for just a moment without answering it directly.
That's what you're here for.
The General Assembly, having the responsibility of to put forward a thorough and efficient system, doesn't mitigate against local control, doesn't mitigate against the local responsibilities. Now, the issue here is that we, as a state, must identify the components of quality education. We must identify what we expect of young people.
Okay.
And then once we have done that, and thoughtfully so, it needs to go through a very vetting process, a process to really get at what it is kids really need in terms of opportunities and what they really need to demonstrate what they know at the end game. Now, until we do that, we can't, in fact, identify a number, a per pupil foundation level. And of course, that involves identifying the components of a quality education for students that are prone to go into career programs, those that are handicapped or have disabilities, those that are in poverty situations. We need to identify those opportunities for those various categories of students, as well as identify what we expect of those young people when they graduate.
Okay, so I guess the question is then has anybody done a study, and there's lots of foundations and think tanks out there that specialize in education. They do this all over the world. In fact, there's something called the PISA ranking about the various countries and everything. Where we are beat by Finland, which really upsets me because the only thing Finland should beat us at is hockey. But so my question is, what what are those components? I mean, somebody must have studied this. What are those components, and how much do they cost? There must be out there an idealized model for every single state to look at to say, these are the various components. Here's how much it's going to cost, and then you need to adjust it for the relatively inexpensive Midwest and South versus the expensive coast.
Well, there are at least 4 methodologies for determining the cost of education. One is a professional judgment approach, where teachers and principals and parents sit down and identify what it is we're going to provide to kids at each various grade levels and for the various categories.
Do we measure outcomes out of that?
We can.
Should it be outcome-based or input-based?
Both. Absolutely both. The other three of the other components are the Successful Schools program.
The Augenblick model, which is
where we look at, it could be, in our state, it was kind of the Augenblick model.
And just fill it for Bobby and Betty Buckeye, what that was, they looked at a bell curve throughout the outliers, and they said, all right, for this area, this out here, 3 or 4 standard deviations above the mean, you're doing quite well. How much do you all cost? That's what we need to supply. But it ignored all the socioeconomic factors of that local school district then, too.
Well, Augenblick's study was incomplete.
Okay.
But then there's the econometric model, and there's, in addition to the professional judgment model, and what we should do is use a combination of all the models. Okay. Because each model puts a different weight on outcomes versus inputs. And in fact, I want to give, and I don't often do this, but give the state some credit. As the Derolph case moved through the courts, we started out with, the state's response was the Augenblick model. Okay. You know, the kind of the output model. Right. The Successful Schools model. And then it kind of, as the years went on and different legislative groups delved into the issue, there was a movement toward, well, maybe we need to look at inputs as well as outputs. Okay. And then at that point, they were, I think the state was getting it right. Now you as I recall, you got into the business of
I rewrote the school foundation formula 3 separate times. It was probably the most frustrating thing I've ever done. Yeah.
And I'm telling you that it's possible. Back in 1998, 1999, our coalition surveyed 2,500 teachers. We had over 100 town meetings. We went to Successful Schools, and we built a curriculum. We built a set of programs that really represented, in our opinion, the components of high-quality education. We published that. We gave it to the state. Right. And, you know, the state just kind of rejected that as it being pie in the sky. Okay.
Well, let me ask you this question. One of the findings of Derolph, and indeed before the film started to roll, we were reminiscing about the famous Tom Moyer Frontline documentary on education, especially in about Ohio, where we had students in southeastern Ohio being educated in converted coal bins. Now we've established the school building facilities program. We've pumped in, what, 5 billion, 7 billion, oodles of money.
Before it's over, more like 23 billion.
23 billion, okay. It's just phenomenal. I can't remember how much money. We've just been pumping this money into here. All right, so have we solved the, roughly speaking, for 90% of the school districts in Ohio, have we solved their lack of an adequate building facility to educate the children in?
One of the great outcomes at Derolph was that today we have over 1,000 new buildings that have replaced probably 2,000 old buildings. Okay. And so...
so we've mostly fixed that.
Well, but the capital bill that's now on the table, going through, I believe, the Senate at this point, has additional money to continue the process. By continuing the process, I mean they're helping districts that are more wealthy, have more property wealth per pupil. And so I suppose that this will go on for another few years to finish up. But the state has done a wonderful job, probably the first in the nation, probably the best in the nation in terms
of buildings.
Right.
Now, but let me ask this question. We talked a little bit about outputs. Has that led to better education products and a better educated workforce? Because at the end of the day, from the state, from the corporate level, and even from national security level, we need a well-educated workforce that has two capacities. One, they have a civic capacity so they can make an intelligent decision on how to vote. And two, they can increase the gross domestic product of the country and the state. Has the building program led to that, do you think? Have we gotten better outcomes, better students, better test scores?
I'm not sure about test scores because they keep changing. The state keeps changing the standard on test scores.
But if you look at ACT and SATs.
Okay. You know, kids are more than a test score.
Okay.
And what the buildings have done, they provided art, music, phys ed labs, science labs, a quality environment. We learn better, we function better in good environments.
Okay.
And there's more to success in education than just the test score. Now, having said that, we have put we as a state, we've really put the teachers and administrators in this state in a real turmoil. Because in this craze for reform, and many of the people that are talking about reform really have another agenda. And that agenda is privatization of public education.
Okay.
Many of the what I call the reforming groups, really have the intention of privatizing public education. So we've been in such a turmoil that's been imposed upon schools that it's really hard to make a determination of are we doing better in terms of a student product.
I will tell you that I've never seen the memo yet on let's go ahead and privatize all Ohio education. If that memo's out there, I've missed it. Let's ask, I want to go. You started off though a little bit with a joint vocational school. Okay. How do you see this whole educational milieu in Ohio serving our workforce needs? I mean, the whole integrated thing of, you know, what's sometimes called K through 80. Okay. You know, are we doing a good job of educating children in a variety, not just for college, but also for the other areas of workforce, for mechanical, and some of what I will call some of your small E engineering degrees and that type of stuff? Are we doing a better job with that, do you think?
Well, and I mentioned that I was a joint vocational school superintendent, and that was back at the time when vocational education under the leadership of Governor Rhodes and a vocational director by the name of Burl Shoemaker, they kind of joined forces and really put Ohio on the map in terms of a comprehensive vocational career program. And that program was started in the late 60s. It evolved, and by the mid-80s, we had one of the finest vocational education programs in the world right here in Ohio. A model where...
You're speaking in the past tense.
Absolutely. That program is still in existence, but the state has put a lot less emphasis on it. There's been this craze of everybody needs a college education, but there are those among us who believe that every kid should go to college. Now that is not the case. We need to strengthen our vocational educational programming in terms of new areas of careers. And there was a time, there's been a time here in the recent past where vocational career education had been de-emphasized. But now it's interesting that the cycle is coming back.
The pendulum swings back. It always does. Well, let me throw this little data point at you. Since 1985, the number of science, technology, engineering, and math college graduates has stayed flat in America. Our number of soft sciences, those in marketing, communication, journalism, sociology, anthropology, has doubled. As a former educator, how much of that do you think comes from our guidance counselors telling little Bobby and Betty Buckeye, oh, math is tough, why don't you go into writing instead? So is the problem at our high school and junior high guidance counselors with this emphasis on college? And often, 15% of the taxi drivers in New York City now have a college degree. Okay, and they're often in anthropology. How do we fix this?
Well, I think it's in the process of being fixed. I think there's a greater emphasis on those.
Okay.
Wouldn't you agree that there's a greater emphasis on those hard sciences?
Well, I would think so, except that I haven't yet seen the evidence I think a lot of this comes from a societal attitude of we don't want to put our children under any stress, make the path easy for them. Right now there's this tendency every child gets a trophy just for participating.
Well, there's probably some of that.
Yeah.
It's probably a cultural change. But on the other hand, it's less percentage of the parents putting the emphasis on. In my household, in my children's households, my grandkids are held to a pretty high standard.
Okay.
And in terms of, just all A's and a B isn't good enough.
Right.
You need all A's.
Right.
And if you get all A's, maybe you ought to be trying for all A pluses.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's not the norm anymore, and it's probably not the norm.
Okay.
So I probably it's a societal shift or a cultural shift.
Okay.
But in the sports world, for example, kids used to get knocked around and
right.
And now they're
everybody wears helmets all the time for doing anything.
And then there's even this emphasis on, well, we shouldn't have certain playground activities,
right? Because
Johnny might get hurt, get bumped, might get a scratch or something. And so there's some of that going on in our social order, but I think it kind of depends on who's leading the parade.
Okay.
In terms of vocational, technical, career education, Governor James A. Rhodes led the parade for vocational education.
Is this governor, you think, is he trying? He's really modeling himself after Jim Rhodes. Do you think he's bringing this back more? Do you put the credit back to him a little bit? Or do you put it back to general societal standards shifting?
Well, Jim Rhodes didn't wait till societal changes took place.
Right.
He dove into it.
Do you think this governor's diving into it?
I think at this point in time, we need to be, instead of inventing new venues for vocational technical training and giving charter schools, for example, some vocational technical money, we ought to be invested in what we have.
Okay.
What we have is good. And the vocational educators in this state have not sit around, waiting on the kids not getting jobs, training for careers that don't exist.
Right.
They've been updating, and I think they're a model for keeping pace. The bottom line is we need to be using that structure that we have in place and investing in that structure rather than inventing new structures.
What is the new structure you see that we're inventing rather than doing the classic vocational school?
Well,
which are, by the way, usually multi-county, and that's a good model for the other educators to follow too. It's more of a regional campus, but please go ahead.
Well, I read in the paper, so I get some of my information from the paper. But with having vocational money given to charter schools, the STEM school idea why don't we think about joining that effort with the vocational centers rather than creating new centers? There are all kinds of possibilities. The regional structure is there.
Okay.
And I don't sense that we're using those structures as much as we ought to be.
Okay. All right. Going back to Derolph, so on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being complete implementation of Derolph, and how I interpret Derolph is a classroom instructional model that the state pays for. Okay? Because I've read Sweeney's decision many times. So it's a classroom instructional model. You abolish the 20 mil floor, thereby destroying the charge-off and destroying phantom revenue. The locals pay for everything that goes on outside the classroom. The state pays for everything that goes on inside the classroom. Now that also means that all of a sudden, Dublin would be getting vast sums of money from the state, in addition to Perry County schools getting vast sums of money from the state. On a scale of 1 to 10, where are we with implementing the Derolph decision? On the buildings, you think that we're at a 9.2, 9.3. We've done a decent job with that. But on the classroom stuff, where do you see us falling on that?
Well, as I read Sweeney's decision, he said there were 4 factors that contribute to the unworkability of the system. One was the foundation formula.
Right.
Secondly, the emphasis on property tax in the formula.
Right.
Now there were 2 other factors that related to buildings and to a loan program. So emphasizing these first 2.
The buildings are pretty much done.
Okay, and I agree with that, and I applaud the state. I applaud the leadership. I applaud Governor Taft and others who are really focused on that.
Right.
But the idea of Derolph, from my perspective, is that Derolph was saying we need to identify what a quality education is.
Okay.
In fact, Sweeney said that our elementary and secondary schools are neither thorough nor efficient.
Is there a state and/or is there a local school system in Ohio that is doing it the best? In other words, the members of the General Assembly all suffer from the same disease, I know, which is, well, tell me who's doing it right and we'll go copy them. So, I mean, 2 years ago, the governor held the State of the State in Steubenville. Now, when I look at the data from Steubenville, that has a very low income setting. And there's to quote George W. Bush, there's often a soft prejudice that, well, poor kids can't learn. Steubenville, I think, pretty well destroys that concept. It's a public school. They're doing remarkable things, and they are saying every child can learn. So is Steubenville then a good model for the rest of the state to look at for outcomes, do you think?
Well, it depends on how those, I know they held up one academy in Steubenville.
Okay.
Now, the question...
But the primary school, the primary and secondary schools, the elementary schools, all the schools seem to be doing... I looked at the data from 2 independent sources, and it seems to be working there.
Well, but I think... you have to go behind the scenes and see what's happening behind the scenes in terms of how... And in fact, as I looked at that one academy that was held up...
Right.
That was a select group of students. Now, this idea has become popular among the reformers that, all kids can learn. We've known that for 200 years, maybe 2,000 years.
Right.
Except no excuses.
Right.
My experience with teachers in Ohio is one of teachers really do try to deal with poverty.
All right.
They do try to deal with kids with handicap.
Okay.
They do try to have each student blossom. Now, in poverty situations, they're working against a lot of odds.
All right. Now, a couple of months ago, I interviewed Steve Dackman, who is the superintendent out at Reynoldsburg. Now, Reynoldsburg I mean, still to this day, I kind of find it hard to believe, but you say to me Reynoldsburg, I still think a mostly white, bourgeois, affluent edge suburb, but it's becoming the poor, and there's been some excellent work from Brookings on this too. The poor are rapidly migrating to the suburbs for a variety of reasons. It's like half of his kids there are now on free and reduced lunch. So, but he has cut school, he's cut his budget tremendously out there. And he flat out says that, I don't want to put words into his mouth, money is important, but it's almost been like this overemphasis, and you can do a lot of stuff with good sound management. So the question is, are we doing enough with good sound management at the principal and superintendent level for our schools, and could we be doing more?
Well, in terms of management, obviously, whether it's a company that's just gone bankrupt, or whether it's a school system or an education enterprise, we can always improve management.
Okay.
I'm there now.
Is Reynoldsburg somebody we should hold up as an example?
I don't want to speak to a specific school district because I don't know enough about what's going on.
Is there a specific state you would hold us? You would say Ohio should go copy.
Let me go back to this whole idea that when we look at results of a school district, we need to really look at the results not only from the standpoint of the academic scores.
Okay.
I remember Governor Taft in a State of State address pointed to a person in the balcony as a superintendent from a poor Southern Ohio school district. That superintendent had led an effort to get good scores and with a little amount of money. But you know how he did it? Cut art, music, phys ed, and anything that he cut anything that he could that didn't directly affect the scores. I know of other superintendents who have told me, look, I'm going to be satisfied with average ratings, but I'm going to educate the whole child. I'm going to provide a whole array, a broad range of educational opportunities.
Okay.
And I think, personally, I would fit into that category. I would subscribe to that.
The whole child.
That we're going to educate the whole child.
Okay.
I mean, that's...
Okay. So, this looks like an ordinary ink pen. It's not. It's actually my magic wand. Now, I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to wave it over you, Bill Phillis, and you get to require the General Assembly to do one thing. Okay? What's more, this guarantees that the governor will sign it, and I'll even get you a majority Supreme Court to uphold it, which you know is the most important thing in this thing. Because the most powerful body in Ohio is not the governor, it's not the General Assembly, it's the Supremes, and how they sing is what really matters in this state. So, what would you have them do, very specifically? What would you have them do?
I would have them, through a consensus process, parents, educators, politicians, the business community.
Would you put unions in there?
Business community, the unions. I would have a prestigious commission.
Okay.
That's one commission, with the responsibility to identify what it is we're going to expect of kids when they graduate with a diploma, and what is it we're going to provide for them? What opportunities?
In funding.
In the educational program.
In funding. Because the money, you're talking about money.
I'm talking about one commission.
Right.
Okay, then a separate commission to take that compendium of educational opportunities, programs, services, and so forth, and determine the level of funding that's necessary to accomplish that.
Okay.
And a third commission to determine where we're going to get the money to do what is necessary to fund it and provide those opportunities.
All right, then let me ask you this.
Three commissions.
Let me ask you this question then. The Ohio House of Representatives, each member represents about 1% of the population. Each senator represents 3.3% of the population. What they do right now with their committee structure and their hearings, that does not represent what you're talking about then.
Absolutely not.
Why has, in your opinion, has the General Assembly and the political structure failed then to create the proper dialogue? I mean, you have representatives who come from all walks of life, all over the state. We guarantee every single geographical region is represented. And yes, there's too many lawyers serving the General Assembly. And actually, compared to the other democracies, we're about 5 times everybody else's rate when it comes to lawyers. But it is a representational cross-section of Ohio, all right? Why has that failed then? Because that's a very similar structure to what you just described.
Well, I'm not sure I know why it's failed.
Has it failed?
In terms of education funding in Ohio,
yes,
yes, it has failed. Now,
but if we don't know how to fix it, we need to know how it failed. So why do you think it failed?
Let me go a little broader on that. That is, at least in the opinion of some people in each state, that has failed in about every. That has failed in about every state in the union because we've had litigation, school funding litigation, in nearly every state in the union, and in most cases we've had more than one case, school funding case.
Like in Kansas just recently.
Yeah. And I could. It would take a while for me to elaborate on why I think it's failed. I think the way that the districts are formed, the legislative districts are formed.
Okay.
You know, in most cases, a legislator really doesn't have to satisfy the local constituency. I know boards of education are out there screaming for relief, but they're not getting any. Legislators don't have to satisfy their constituencies. Most of them are in safe districts, Democrat and Republican alike. They're in safe districts. So they don't really hear the cry of the needs.
Okay. All right. So
and so, you know, that's why we have. Well, you know, our forefathers were really great in setting up this 3 branches of government.
Okay.
Knowing that a legislature would not do the right thing sometimes and needed a court to examine what they were doing.
All right. Let me throw something out for you to think about then, and get your response to this. The reason the best school system to live in Ohio is to live in a school system where it's full of outlet malls, industrial parks, and you own the only house. Okay, the schools that in the communities that you and I were raised in was one of mixed income. You had people from a wide variety of incomes living there. Now we have economic demographic segregation. And so the question is, you know, the school funding model, I will tell you, used to work up until sometime in the mid-'70s, because the community had a certain amount of economic activity going on within it. Now the economic activity, there's been a separation between where you live, where you shop, and where you work. But our whole system of governance and taxation is predicated upon the model you will do all those within 5 miles of where you live. Almost nobody does now. Okay, for example, we're filming this here in Columbus at the Columbus Athletic Club. Since they built Polaris Mall north of town here, the sales tax revenue in Delaware County has essentially doubled, as everybody from the surrounding areas now goes to Delaware and shop. What that also means, their school systems benefit because of all the bricks and mortar that's going on up through there. We've hit this imbalance now. So when you talk about all this school funding thing, the only way to really address it is for the state has to go ahead and pool the money from all over the state and give it to the local districts. Isn't that the way this is going to have to work at the end?
At the end of the day,
And so then we have the problem of local control, because if all the money comes from the state, eventually you and I both know that the control is going to come from the state. And so can we really utilize the Derolph decision and maintain, do we really need 614 school districts, Bill? Under that model, where the state really funds them completely, do we really need 614? Can we get by with 88?
well, you've given me a lot of fodder to eat here in the
Right.
last couple
I guess here's
minutes.
the core question.
Well-
Do we need 614 school districts, or can we get by with 88? Because we have 88 counties.
My belief is we don't need to consolidate school districts in order to improve educational opportunities.
But they have up in Orville and Rittman, and in doing so, they freed up $270,000 a year just on the back office operations.
But you know, there was a superintendent in southeastern Ohio that was superintendent of Frontier Local and Warren Local, and he said before a legislative committee that he certainly wouldn't recommend that arrangement.
Okay.
Now, in terms of percentage of the expenditures going to administration in small districts tends to be less than the percentage going to administration in larger districts. I think it's a myth to think that we can save money by just merely consolidating school districts.
Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 is the sweet spot. I mean, I've seen the data. Now, Jim Petro, former state auditor, former attorney general, used to joke that what we need to do is simply, he said also, you look at the data, the curve doesn't do positive things after about 12,000 students. Okay, so there is a sweet spot here in the data points, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 students, which for most of the rural areas is a single county. Okay, so you want to have efficiency. Now that means all of a sudden you're saving money you can then put into French. And by the way, that's what they're doing up in Orville or Rittman. For the first time ever, they're offering French classes now because of the consolidation of the back office operations. And nobody's taking the mascot out on the sidewalk and clubbed it like a baby seal. Okay, they still have their own athletic teams. Okay, why aren't we seeing that more? I mean, that's a way to solve in a minor way to solve school funding problems in Ohio is more efficiency.
Well, there's a point of diminishing returns.
Okay.
And my only reaction to all of this is that we're not going to solve the school funding problem by consolidation.
No, but it's an aspect. We didn't, and we fixed the building problem.
Okay, but this would be this should be a product of an overall comprehensive study, as opposed to, you know, here and there we're going to have two superintendents or one superintendent for two districts, or we're going to consolidate a couple of districts, and there are some consolidations taking place today,
right,
or will be taking place today. But in my opinion, that's not going to solve this issue. The issue is greater than just consolidating some school districts or doing some regionalization kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, that's just where I am.
All right. Any final words here before we run out of film?
You mentioned a while ago, and I lost it.
That happens to me all the time too.
Well, I lost it in terms of, you said something about, are there some really great school districts or good school districts in Ohio? Certainly. Wonderful school districts.
Would you be willing to go out on a limb and name us one?
Well, my grandkids go to a wonderful school district in Olentangy.
Okay.
They're in the Orange High School attendance area.
Okay.
A wonderful district in terms of a broad range of opportunities.
It's affluent, though, too, isn't it?
And in terms of in terms of high-quality instructional people and administrators.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an affluent area,
Okay.
and that gets back to something you said earlier. People are tending to group in certain economic areas, which is a real problem. Cleveland, when I first started my teaching career, in a rural area, if we wanted to see where quality education was occurring, if we wanted to visit programs, we would, and if we wanted to get curriculum guides, you know where we would go in those years. We'd go to Dayton, Cleveland, Youngstown, Columbus.
Those were the leaders.
They were the leaders because the wealth
Was there.
was concentrated there. I blame Dwight D. Eisenhower for messing this up.
With the interstate system. Well, a lot of people are willing to blame Dwight for a lot of things.
But that's one that he should be able.
So, all right. Well, listen, we better bring this to an end. Thank you very much. This has been Gene Krebs on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions. We're high in Ohio, and we're going around this great state interviewing people. Thank you very much, and tune in next week.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.